What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for the past weekend, which saw Avatar: The Way of Water continue its box office dominance, flying past $1.7 billion, well tracking ahead of where it is projected to be on the charting based off of the first 2 weeks. Again, typical performance for most films. This film likely to cross $2 billion pretty easily. The question is, how much more above $2 billion does it get? Is it $2 billion to 2.5? That's kind of the range that I'm looking at right now based off of the numbers. But regardless of any of that, this film has indeed doubled what it made, or getting very close to doubling what it made in the first couple weeks of its release, which does make a lot of sense, seeing that it did have a Christmas and New Year's within its first 2 weeks, meaning that those box office numbers probably got impacted to some degree, people watching it after the fact when they actually had the holiday, actually had the break. And again, the legs for this film have been incredibly strong, and the word of mouth, at least according to places like Rotten Tomatoes, etc., have been relatively positive when it comes to the audience scoring. Though I think that when you talk to just regular everyday people, I do think that there is a large contingency of people that are either just diehard fans of Avatar, diehard James Cameron fans, but then you also have a lot of people that are just not really blown away and not really convinced by all of the magical CG effects and can't look past the actual narrative story flaws. And so I think that you have these two different groups out there, because let's just say I know a lot of people who love this movie and I know a lot of people who hate this movie, and those two groups absolutely do exist. So we'll talk about what this film is doing. I do, of course, love how in their headline they're kind of being disingenuous, as is typical for mainstream media, saying it's now the 7th biggest movie ever. Yes, before you adjust for inflation. And I know there are people who apparently are getting triggered every time I mention even the word inflation, but the point is, and the fact is, you have to consider it. It has to be brought into account, because the fact is, one, the dollar today is not worth nearly as much as it was 10, 20 years ago, let alone even 5 years ago. And also, the number of tickets that are being sold today are far less than what they were the same amount of time ago as well. We have to keep in mind that when it comes to Avatar: Way of Water, it has probably, if not on record, very close to on record, the highest average ticket price for any movie, because of the vast majority of its showtimes being in IMAX 3D and 3D. So we have to all keep all of these things into account, to be honest, to be nuanced with this approach. Because is the film making money? Well, depending on whether you believe James Cameron or the studio, it could be either yes or no. Again, I go based off of the studio, and based off of the studio, this film has already made, close to $400 million in net gain profits. So again, kudos to them for being able to make money off of this movie. But if you look to James Cameron's numbers, or at the very least what he has indicated by his numbers, according to the man himself, he said that the film, just again, this was just from an interview a couple days ago, he said that he thought he was a few days out from hitting the break-even point. So who knows more, James Cameron or the people who are getting reports from the studios of as far as budget and as far as marketing campaign is concerned? Was James Cameron given a number? Does James Cameron, as the filmmaker, have a good idea of what the film actually costs to make and what the actual money being put into the marketing budget actually is? I would say that as the director, writer, and producer of the film, I would say his word probably is to be taken pretty seriously. But it is interesting that when it comes to that dynamic, more people are willing to say, no, you're just misreading what he is saying. And he has gone on to clarify what he has said. And he just reiterates the same point, saying, well, some people have said $2 billion, and I never said that. I just said that it had to be one of the highest grossing films of all time, which, yes, if you look at that number and that list, that happens to be films that, made $2 billion. But really, we're actually a lot closer than that. It's actually a lot less than that. And we're a few days away. And he was saying this when the film had already reached 1.7 billion. Which makes me think, okay, so is he saying that the break-even point is going to be around 1.7 billion? Is it going to be closer to 2 billion? Again, these are all questions that I'll let the James Cameron fandom try to figure out, some of whom acting in very cult-like behavior, though not all. And I want to make that very clear, that I think that there are a lot of really good-hearted people out there who generally enjoy the film. And hey, if you enjoy this film, no problem at all. But I do ask that you do at least understand and at least accept the fact that the film does have a lot of objective flaws, especially with its overall narrative. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into the numbers themselves, because again, this is a pretty massive film. It goes on to say, well, that was fast. Great job, Deadline. Coming out of its fourth weekend of release, James Cameron's Avatar has topped $1.7 billion globally and becoming the number 7th, without adjusting for inflation, biggest film of all time. With an estimated 1.7 through Sunday, the 20th Century Studios sequel has overtaken 2019's Lion King 1.6. Again, I actually would doubt that. I haven't put that into the inflation calculator, but I imagine it probably hasn't officially done that yet. Jurassic World's 1.62. I can say, based on the fact of how many years that's been, that is absolutely not true. And again, that is the reason why it's so very important, because just because you have a higher number, if that number and if the dollar in which it's signifying is worth less, and also your average ticket price is a lot higher, what that means is two things. One, there's more money that was made based in today's standards, but from the films that are being mentioned here, for one. And then two, also, this does not impact the actual number of tickets that are being sold. And again, there are a ton of tickets that are being sold to this movie. It just happens to be that when you look to IMAX 3D premium showings, that's where you're seeing the full screens or the half full screens or the very crowded scenes. When you look to the 2D regular showings, if they even have them at their theater, because they're very, again, small in number, they do exist, but they're not nearly as common as the others, you start to see there's almost nobody in there. So again, are people seeing it? Yes. But it's people going to see it in the highest ticket price possible. And so this helps us to better understand, one, exactly where this film falls as far as films in the history of the box office is concerned. It is still, again, doing well. Even with all those caveats, you're still dealing with probably, a top 20 film in 4 weeks, a top 20 film all-time adjusted for inflation, which is just really, again, impressive. Even if I hate the movie, I'm still going to be honest about the actual numbers themselves. But again, I just wanted to put that out there because I do think it is quite important. It's also important because I call out Marvel whenever they do dealings, right? When Disney has done dealings with China in the past, I called them out. I call out any major studio that does dealings with China. But one interesting fact that they do mention here in this article is that the film has indeed continued to do well in China. As it says, in China, the hold was around a 55% drop, and Mauen is still projecting the film to have a $220 million final. And I mention that because in China, in order to do dealings there, Hollywood studios have to be able to do the deal to allow the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, take 75% of the box office receipts. And if you're going to try and say, well, it's actually the theaters there that get 75%, yes, who are owned and influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. So if we're going to talk about this film making a lot of money, absolutely, but let's also be honest with the fact that means that well over $100 million probably by the end of its run, or at the very least $100 million, is going to be going to fund the Chinese Communist Party. And that is, again, something that I have consistently called out when it comes to any film. So again, haters going to, hey, let's go ahead and look at the actual charting itself. $45 million at the domestic for this film, and this is incredibly impressive. As you can see from this, we are looking at the overall numbers here. It looks like they decided to change for some reason the columns that were being shown. That's the one that I'm looking for. So a 33% drop from last weekend. That is really impressive. Remember, I was saying that this weekend's really going to be the telling point of whether or not this film is going to be a $2.5 billion film or possibly even more. Right now, this film is tracking very, very well. This is a non-holiday weekend, and that's the reason why people like me and others were saying, hey, I think I could see this film having a large drop-off. Not because of a bias against the movie, but because of the fact that big-budget films have massive drop-offs. That just tends to be the actual case. And when it comes to a movie like this that had a lot of people show up over the holiday season, once everyone's back at work, are people going to actually show up? Sure enough, they are. And in fact, they even added 138 screens, still making around $10,000 per screen. So pretty good numbers there for this movie. A 33% hold after the fourth week of release, when not seeing really any massive drop-offs in any of its weekends. Yeah, this film is on pace right now at $516 million domestically. Right now, I would say $700 million is absolutely within the ballpark. I still hope the film does not cross Top Gun Maverick, because that film, again, I just think was so much more enjoyable, and which is a better film better film overall. And everything that was done in that film just deserves to have the recognition that it's gotten so far. It'd be really nice to see that film at the top domestically, while Avatar can have the international numbers there, because obviously Avatar is a huge international hit. But this film is still tracking very, very close, not too far behind the adjusted numbers for inflation for the first Avatar. And that first Avatar, when you adjust, ended around $900 million domestic. So I would say $700 million domestic is a very likely scenario. for this movie, but we will wait and see. Also, a very big surprise. Speaking of, again, that one was not much of a surprise. We expected it to do well, but again, even for me, I didn't expect it to do that well. I didn't expect it to have that low of a drop. M3gan, that's right, the new thriller film about the creepy-looking doll, which looked really bad. The trailer was awful, and it's a January film, and this is where typically films go to die. Well, apparently M3gan is not. Their marketing campaign, similar to how Smile had a very good marketing campaign, it seemed to have paid off because it opened to $30.2 million domestically, and based off of this and its international numbers, the film has already broken even. And of course, having a $12 million budget helps with that, but it is interesting nonetheless to see this film do as well as it did, and in fact, not even be too far off as a second place to Avatar. Now again, Avatar's still 4 weeks out, so there's obviously going to be a difference in comparison there, but $30.2 million for a film in January to have already made its money back, that is very, very impressive for M3gan. So kudos to Universal for being able to pull that off with their marketing campaign. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is also doing quite well. Another 22% hold for this movie, even though they're starting to drop this from theaters. This movie is right on the cusp of being able to break even, and I think that based off of the pacing of this film domestically, internationally, it will probably be able to do that. So this film will definitely be, as I mentioned, this film would either be a small loss or a small gain. It's looking like it's going to be a small gain when all is said and done. They also have A Man Called Otto, which added 633 screens. This added a 7,000% increase, but again, it's because it was only in about 4 screens. $6,000 per screen, though, is still pretty good for this indie film from Sony Pictures. I say indie just in the fact of its very independent style release. Coming in the number 5 spot is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, still making money, $3.3 million, a 34% hold, still at over 2,000 screens. And look at that number for the domestic people, $445.4 million. And I've been saying this now for a while. The film was going to get what domestically? $450 to $500. And it's looking like that is indeed going to be the case. Many people said, I don't see how your math works out on that. And for me, I said, hey, you might be looking at the day-to-day performance and you might be trying to work it out that way. For me, I looked at it as it's a holiday season. These films are going to do well, right? Even me, when looking at Avatar, I said, there is a good chance for this film to do a lot of money over the holiday season. And sure enough, it was actually able to do that quite easily. But anyway, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever continuing to pace forward and looking like it's going to end probably just shy of $850 million because based off of what was added from the last weekend, it looked like that the only thing added was the domestic numbers. So it seems that this film is not doing anything else in the international markets at this point, or at least not enough to make really that much of a splash. So this film will probably end up getting pushed to $450 million, a little over that by the end of its domestic run, and will probably end just shy of $850 million or so. Could be a little higher, but $850. And so much better than what we saw with Thor: Love and Thunder, not nearly as close as what we saw with Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and still far off from the $1.3 billion when $1.3 billion that the first Black Panther film did. And again, if you want to compare tickets to ticket for ticket, Lord knows that first Black Panther film sold a heck of a lot more tickets than this film did. So those were the top 5 movies going into the internationals now. $1.7 billion for Avatar: Way of Water. Again, very impressive numbers there. But as I mentioned, right now at this point, $180 million has gone to China. And again, 75% of that is going to the actual Communist Party there. And as I said, I'm always going to call that out, just like with the films, the first Avatar film and also Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, which I also believe had a China release. So let's go ahead and check that on the fly. I don't want to put it under the bus if I don't have to, but no, it did. Yeah, $69 million. It was not a big film in China, but still millions of dollars. Disney is well known for having these deals with China. But I have been doing this tracking of, okay, what are some of the comparables of the domestic? Where is Avatar going to end up? And looking at these numbers right now, the movie that was being brought up by some of the mainstream media was that Rogue One: Star Wars Story. So seeing exactly how the film was going to fare. And sure enough, when you look at the $516 million that it has made in its 4th weekend, it is now past where Rogue One was at the time of its release. Remember that, the media was trying to argue that this was about a week ago that the film had passed Rogue One, but they were not adjusting for inflation. And when you realize that, you see, okay, it did not do that until this weekend. This is the weekend that was able to push Avatar domestically over the edge. And so now 516 versus Rogue One's 506 with the adjusted for inflation numbers. The 466 made by Top Gun Maverick is going to be the interesting one because not too far off where 516 was. The question is, are we going to start to see some weekday drop-offs with people being back in work, more and more people being back at work? And I think it was close to somewhere between 65 and 85% of the workforce was back and schools were back this past week. So you add on probably this coming week, even more people being back in school. You then also do have the MLK holiday coming up, so there's a lot of question marks as to exactly where the films are going to end up by the end of their runs, but there is no denying that when it came to Top Gun Maverick, the film continued to have strong numbers week in, week out, like just, again, to crazy degrees, to be able to get to $711 million domestically. So will the film Avatar 2 be able to outpace that? Right now it currently is, but we'll have to wait and see if the day numbers are going to be able to match up as well. Based on what we're seeing, it seems that, again, Wednesday was 6 million, so we can expect some drop-offs there. Maybe the film's topping at around 5 million or so, and if that is indeed going to be the case, well, then that's when Top Gun Maverick can start to make up a little bit of area there. So it'll be interesting to see where those films end up, because, again, I do think that there is a lot to suggest Avatar getting to $700+ million domestically, but we do have to wait and see what those numbers hold out. This weekend hold, though, definitely good news for that movie. M3gan has made $45 million worldwide, so at a $12 million budget, this film has made its money back. Puss in Boots having a much better than expected run. I think positive word of mouth on this film has definitely helped. Man Called Otto, $12.6 million, independent film. Hard to say whether or not the film is really that much of a success. And then $825 million is the total right now for Wakanda Forever. As of last weekend, it was around 822. So as you can see, that $3 million from the domestic was really all that was added for this film, which is the reason why I suspect the film will not make it that much far past 850 and probably end a little bit before that. Going into the charting now, because we all love charting to end things for today. We see here again with M3gan's $45 million, $12 million budget, meaning it's around a $30 million break-even point. The film has already made $9 million in net profit. So again, 3.8 times its budget. Very impressive numbers there. The Whitney Houston film is still $42 million in the red, so still a financial flop. Babylon, still a $100 million flop as well. Puss in Boots, because it is tracking quite well, is only $9 million in the red, and so it's looking very likely for that film to end up being probably by the end of its run somewhere between that 27 and $5 million in the profits margin. Avatar: The Way of Water, $417 million, so almost doubling what it did in the first 2 weeks of its release. 4.2 times its budget. So again, if we go by the studio's numbers, it's made $417 million in net gain profit. If you go by James Cameron's numbers, then or at least his alleged numbers, his projected numbers, his, again, very weird story. I talked about this on my live stream last night on OMB Reviews if you want to check out more, and I'll actually break this down and say, okay, if the actual break-even point is this, based off of the filmmaker, producer, writer's words, then what is the profit margin looking like? I go based off of, in my charting, what the studio says, and based on the average of what has been reported by the studio, then we're looking at $417 million in net gain profit, which is really, really impressive. Doesn't make the film good, but it is impressive. Violent Night still at, again, making money, $15 million there. Strange World continues to be over $200 million of a loss. And then also a film that I was a really big fan of, The Menu. There is actually some different numbers being reported from the numbers versus Box Office Mojo, and so I usually let a week go by if there's ever a discrepancy, because Box Office Mojo is notorious for having incorrect numbers from time to time. And so it's been a week. These numbers have remained the same. And so it looks like this is probably going to be a much more accurate number. We'll see if the numbers actually ever catches up. But that means that this film has indeed gone well past the 50% mark as far as, versus his first 2 weeks, and is basically on the cusp of breaking even, only officially being 195,000 in the red. So this film vastly outperformed historical standards, and I'm very happy to hear it. It's a darn good film, and I recommend everyone goes to see it. So those are the numbers. What are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. And again, if you want a full breakdown of Avatar: Way of Water, especially with the James Cameron numbers, I'll go ahead and do that live. I'll put my charting in live for people to be able to see, okay, if the break even is this, what does that then mean for the film's actual profit margins? And we'll have some fun with that and do some speculation based off of the words of the man himself. And again, if you want to see me break down his comments and put them in the full context, and again, I don't shy away from any of that, check out my live stream from last night over at OMB Reviews. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Make sure you smash the like button, the fire button, Aussie, and smash the rumble button. You're all amazing. Have a blessed Christmas. Have a blessed Epiphany. Again, many are celebrating the Feast of the Epiphany today, or Epiphany Tide if you are in a more traditional rite. You guys are amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.